And we're back, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Sons of History podcast. Alan, are you ready to get to going?
Yeah. Something went down the wrong way. Sorry.
Wow. Unbelievable. That's what... Anyways, all right, moving on. Yeah, we're going to have a good episode of this week. I can already guarantee you, and I will tell you why. The reason this is going to be such a great episode is because it is an episode that is of the Sons of History. Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't yet, do us a favor and subscribe wherever you're listening, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever. Subscribe, leave us a rating and a review. You know what I just noticed? I noticed that now Spotify is allowing ratings and reviews. I didn't know that they were allowing that.
I thought they all did ratings and reviews. Isn't that a common thing?
Yeah, I mean, you would think that more of them would do that, but apparently that is not the case. The only one that I have ever noticed having the rating and review is on the Apple Podcast. Which our ratings and reviews are quite good. Now, if you haven't yet and you're a fan of the show and you haven't left a rating and review like on Apple Podcasts, do us a favor. A 5-star review would be fantastic. Now, surprises on the show. You may have been surprised to see something last week, which apparently you are seeing again this week, which is a lovely photo by my good friend Alan. What is going on? I did not mention that last week.
With what? What photo?
The photo behind you. You've never had that before. This is not a newborn baby, so I can only imagine that this is one, not your child, or two, is your long-lost child.
Well, okay, look, this is a family photo, or a family show, so I thought I would, lighten up the place with a nice, family photo. I think it looks nice, don't you think?
So is this like a family photo that is not your family? It's sort of like you go to Kirkland's or you go to Hobby Lobby?
Look, I don't have a family to, I got Star Wars. I have Star Wars for crying out loud, so I gotta liven it up a bit. So
yeah, but that's your own personal childhood. Whose childhood are you capturing right there behind you in that frame?
All right, it's that little brat from Willy Wonka.
Okay, all right. Well, that is really bizarre that you would have that. I don't need an explanation for why you have it. I don't need an explanation for anything. I trust that whatever reason you have is it makes sense.
Look, this is a family show. I didn't have any other pictures. I just happened to have that, and I was, hey, you know what? I'm gonna frame it. I didn't think anyone was gonna sit and take notice like you would. I mean, no one has ever said anything about my statues, my Star Wars, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica. So here we go.
I will tell you this, Bears beats Battlestar Galactica, and you have no idea what I'm referencing. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move on. I will go ahead and compliment myself. Alan, this is not me. This is not my mother. This is not anybody I know personally, but a recent article that I wrote for the Epic Times' magazine, American Essence, got on the cover. This is the second time, man. This is the second time I've gotten on the cover. And it's about somebody that you and I have discussed, I think a couple of years ago, Major Taylor, the guy who was the world champion cyclist back in the turn of the 20th century. So if you get the American Essence, or if you don't, you can always Google American Essence magazine and then get a subscription and then possibly get this one and read my story, or you can go online and read it as well. Did you want to follow up with congratulations?
I don't think we discussed Major Taylor before, because I'd never heard of Major Taylor before.
No, we did. We remember, I think it was, we started in October of 2018, and I want to say it was either that following February or it was the February after that one that we did our favorite, it was Black History Month. So we did like our favorite sports figures. And so Major Taylor was one of the ones that I mentioned. So I thought it was just, his story is really fascinating. Interesting, the first time I ever ran across his name was from that Hennessy commercial a few years ago, which was actually very well done.
I think that might have been the one that I mentioned, the boxer. I think he was from Houston or Galveston, and he had just been
Galveston.
pardoned.
Yeah, Jack Johnson.
Yeah, I think that was that weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, it probably was. It probably was. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, our guest is going to be on the show. He is out in Dublin, Ireland. So that is my fear right now, is that I am, during conversation with Des Ekin, I am going to slip into an Irish accent and embarrass you, me, and our guest, or irritate him to no end. So keep your fingers crossed that I don't do anything like that.
I will. Yeah, don't worry about that. I figured you might go into your Scottish. How can you tell the difference between a Scottish and an Irish? Is it like New York?
Is this a joke?
Is it like New York and Boston? You know, because you know how you can tell the difference between a New Yorker and a Bostonian, don't you? The
New Yorker and a Boston. Go ahead.
New Yorker has more of the like, hey, I'm from New York, you know. But Boston, they're more of like a car, you know, like get in the car, you know.
See,
you want to go to the bar?
I can always differentiate between the Scottish and the Irish by the R's. So the Scottish is like, oh, right now, right? And then with the Irish, it's like, oh, right now. You know, so they have the new, like, about, you know, it's almost like a Canadian thing. And you know what? I'm probably like irritating a lot of the Irish and the Scottish listeners that we have, which we will probably have predominantly on for this episode.
Yeah, well,
just
don't irritate our guest, because that would not be good.
Yeah. But speaking of famous Irishmen, my friend Kent Matthews, he ran across these. Look at this. This is like shortly after the assassination of JFK. John F. Kennedy, a famous Irish American. God rest his soul. Anyways, I am also wearing green. You seem to be wearing green as well.
Negative.
Good thinking. Although last week, that's not green?
No, that's
what is that?
That's like a brownish, I think.
Oh.
I don't know.
Like with the zoom. With the zoom, it looks like it's like a forest green.
I grabbed it out of the hamper, so I don't know.
Well, good for you. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get on with the program. Our guest is Des Ekin. He is a historian and journalist after spending several years covering the Ulster Troubles, which we will touch on, I guarantee you. He rose to become deputy editor of the Belfast Sunday News, or Belfast Sunday News. He worked as a journalist, columnist, and eventually political correspondent for the Sunday World until 2012. Now, he's written several books, including Ireland's Pirate Trail, a quest to uncover our swashbuckling past, Hell or Some Worse Place, Kinsale 1601, Stolen Village, Baltimore, and the Barbary Pirates, which was shortlisted for the Argosy Irish Nonfiction Book of the Year and for, this is wild, Book of the Decade in the Borgash Energy Irish Book Awards. And his latest, the one that we're primarily going to be talking about, I really slipped into that southern accent, primarily going to be talking about, is the Lionkeeper of Algiers, how an American captive rose to power in Barbary and saved his homeland from war. Now, this is going to be, I think, a very enlightening.
We don't talk much about the Barbary Wars.
Yeah, no, we haven't. And it's really fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, you know, a lot of people have never even heard of the Barbary Wars. And, you know, if you're a Marine, or you know someone who's a Marine, you know the part about from the shores of Tripoli.
Yeah.
Tripoli was a Barbary nation. And that's when William Eaton crossed the North African coast with some Marines and some mercenaries, or auxiliaries, whatever you want to call them, and they took over parts of Tripoli. So on the shores of Tripoli, I think the city was called Derna or Derna or Derma, something like that.
Well, it is that whole era is very interesting. I mean, that's sort of your start out of necessity of the American Navy under Jefferson and gets everything started. So it's going to be a fun conversation, and we are looking forward to talking to Des, and he is on the line now. Des, how are you doing, man?
I'm great, thank you, and in very good form. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on the show. Great honor.
Hey, we're happy to have you. I will
Yeah,
say
it's
this.
too bad that we didn't have you here last weekend since it was St. Patrick's Day.
It was St. Patrick's weekend, and we all had great fun. And last this time last week, we just Ireland had just defeated its old rival on the rugby pitch. So I'm in much better form now than I was this time last week. So we were all having a great time. If you'd interviewed me this time last week, would have been a very interesting interview, but probably not the most coherent.
Oh, that's okay. By the time we finished our conversation, I think I was a bit on the. I had a little too much Irish whiskey, so.
There we go. And speaking of Ireland and everything, in your honor, Des, I've got now we can't say the names of these places, but it's a famous drink made out in Dublin. So here's to you.
I can't think what it would be.
I bet.
No, I think maybe I'm not participating the way I should have because I kind of went with the martini today. So
I am having tea. I'm the party pooper at the show.
So, Des, I will just say that I thoroughly loved your book. Being introduced to an American from way back when, early America, and an American hero, as I note in my review that I did for the Epic Times. It was a real pleasure not just to read the book, but also to be introduced to a new American hero. And I thank you for writing the book. Before we get into the Lionkeeper of Algiers, I do want to give you an opportunity to give a bit of your backstory. I did mention that you were a journalist. How did your career get started?
Well, I started off in a local newspaper, one of these very small newspapers in town in County Down in Northern Ireland, and I got a job in the big city, partially just through accident, literally an accident. I was covering a hot air balloon trip across Frankfurt Loch, and when we got to the other side, there was a freak wind blew down and blew us into power cables. There was nothing anybody could have done about it. It wasn't the pilot's fault. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but it shorted out the entire area. Lots of flashing, banging, electricity. Luckily, we managed to scramble away from the wreckage completely unhurt. And the first thing I did, instead of sort of phoning up my home and telling people I was all right, I phoned in the story to the newspaper because I knew this was a big scoop. And as a result of that, one of the reasons I was able to get a job in the big city, so move up a notch. So I went to work for people called the Sunday News in Belfast, which is now defunct. But it was at the height of the Troubles, and it was pretty nasty for a time. There were bombs going off all the time. There were shootings, and we were working with Sunday paper, so I had to go out and report the Troubles on a Saturday night, which was one of the most busy nights for things to happen. So wasn't too pleasant, but luckily there was nothing happened to me personally. So after about 5 years doing that, we moved to Dublin, which is in the Republic of Ireland, which is relatively peaceful. Uh, just because I wanted to raise a family in more peaceful surroundings, and have stayed here ever since.
Fantastic. Well, I'm happy that you are safe, and I think we're all blessed that you are safe and that you've been able to put together a number of books. The most recent, The Lionkeeper of Algiers. I can't encourage people enough to get this book. It's about a man by the name of James Cathcart. I believe I'm saying that right. So, who is James Cathcart, and how did you come across this story?
Well, to answer the second question first, I was researching a book called The Stolen Village, which was about a pirate raid on a village called Baltimore in County Cork, not to be confused with your Baltimore. And pirates had sailed all the way up from North Africa and landed at this little port and abducted nearly all the villagers, took them away to Algiers and sold them on the market there as slaves. And I was absolutely intrigued by this story. And as I was researching it, I stumbled upon the story of James Cathcart, who was an American, an Irish American, captured in a much later era, and he was abducted, taken to Algiers, but managed to rise through the ranks of power from a grunt worker to the highest position that an outsider could have in Algiers, and he was privileged to be able to help to seal a peace deal between America and Algiers, and he rose to have a chain of bars. He owned a chain of bars, pubs, and he also had his own ship, which was absolutely a remarkable story for somebody who's on free. He was a hostage all this time. So this intrigued me totally because I've always been intrigued with the sort of stories of fish out of water stories, culture clash stories, where people are taken out of their comfortable environment and dumped somewhere in the alien culture to them, a completely different country, different climate, different language. How do they cope? Some people can't cope, others rise above it the way Cathcart did. And that's what intrigued me most about it. So I decided I was going to write a book about Cathcart, but I had other projects along the line, so I had to keep postponing it and postponing it. But then when the coronavirus lockdowns came, I had no excuse left, so I just wrote the book, and it's really strange. It just seemed to trundle along with its own pent-up energy. It just could not stop writing it. It was sometimes you get writer's block, sometimes it's difficult. This story just told itself, and that's always a good sign with the story. Second question, or sorry, the first question was who is James Cathcart? Will I go on with that? Yeah. Um, James Cathcart was Irish. He was born Irish American. He left Ireland at a very early age. He was born in County Westmeath in Ireland. He was sent away to sea by his family at age 10, which is absolutely remarkable. His uncle was a sea captain. He took him over to America, where he learned skills of seamanship. Started off as a cabin boy, just a young lad, but he was there just about the right time for the American Revolution, for the War of Independence, and of course he signed up for this. He became a midshipman, and he was apparently, according to some reports, he was the youngest midshipman to serve in the Revolutionary War. I'm not sure if that's true, but he was certainly one of the youngest, age 12 at the time. He served under a privateer called Seth Harding, who was one of the most prominent privateers fighting on behalf of America for its independence. Cathcart was captured while on board this Harding ship, and he was put into a prison hulk in New York, and conditions on that were pretty horrible. There's a couple of different accounts on what happened next. Some people say he escaped and made his way across country. Others say that he was just uh, he was captured again by the English. But either way, he ended up fighting for the Royal Navy for the last year of the war. How this came about, nobody's quite sure, but it looks likely that because he was born in Ireland, which was at the time under English jurisdiction, they regarded him as English and or as British, sorry, and that he had to fight for monarch and country. So I don't think this was his own choice. So he ended up, uh, when the war ended, he's a young guy at 17, 18. His life is ahead of him. He signs up as a merchant seaman on a ship called the Maria, bound for Spain. And while he's in Boston, he meets two Italians, and he gets on really well with them. And it turns out that these two are going to play a crucial role in his life in Algiers. So he sets up from America. as I say, he's excited. He's all thinking all his nightmares are behind him, the war, the prison hulks, and sets off across the Atlantic. But he never gets to. While he's off the coast of Portugal, sees a strange sail on the horizon. Turns out to be an Algiers corsair ship. Corsair is a term for Mediterranean pirates. And at the time, there was no declared war between Algiers and America, the infant United States, and everybody assumed that American sailors were safe going into the Mediterranean. But the Algerines, as they called them, had decided just unilaterally that they were going to launch this war against America. They were going to capture American seamen and hold them to ransom. So this was a complete surprise to everybody. There had been a bit of uncertainty surrounding Morocco, another Barbary state, in the year before. But anyway, they captured him. Um, he was the first. Cathcart was the first man to be captured by the first American to be captured by the Algerines, and there were many more after him. And it was quite a strange experience. First of all, they would ransack the ship, take over the ship. Then they took them over by boat to the Algiers pirate ship. And one of these weird customs that they had in Algiers was as each of the Americans boarded, uh, they were pinched. The captors pinched them for good luck. So they were sort of moving around the ship, getting pinched, running this sort of gauntlet. They were all their clothes were stolen. They had to wear just basic clothes, hand-down clothes that the Algerines had given them, and they were thrown into the hold alongside some Portuguese people who'd been captured earlier. So they were on their way to Algiers.
So they were getting pinched. Is that where the tradition started, where if you don't wear green on St. Patrick's Day, you get pinched?
That's very interesting. I never thought of that. No, I wouldn't think so. I think it was very much in North Africa, but I hope you're right.
Yeah, yeah, that would be very interesting.
See, when I think pinched, I'm thinking Goodfellas.
Yeah, yeah.
He got pinched by the heat. That's where you have to, keep your mouth shut and don't rat on your friends.
I didn't realize that. Pinched means you keep quiet.
Yep.
Over time. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, beautiful. So when I was reading the book, I started mentally making comparisons to Rick in the movie Casablanca, and you bring that up relatively early in the book too, which I thought was really cool because I was like, yeah, this is like the fictional character Rick in the movie Casablanca, where he's, just this guy who runs a bar and he, tries to help people out. And so readers who are, possibly interested in this book will find some comparison there with something that they do know. Um, what are some of the ways that, because I just mentioned Rick, but what are some of the ways that he is comparable to the fictional character that a lot of people here in America love?
Right. Well, the when he got to Algiers, it took a while, but he managed to get a chain of pubs, and he like Rick in Casablanca. Now, you mentioned earlier that you regarded him as a hero, that is Cathcart, and I'm cool with that. But to me, he's more interesting than a hero. I think he's an everyman, Cathcart. He was he's had many flaws. He was no angel. He was somebody with he was ambitious. He had an eye for the main chance. He was not afraid to use bribery and corruption to get ahead. But despite all that, he was able uh, to help his fellow Americans in Algiers. And one of the ways he was able to do it was through his bars. He used his bars as food banks, quite not illicitly, but secretly. He would his fellow Americans weren't in any great shape. They were being kept in prison where they were treated very badly, made to work at the docks, and they were starved. They were malnourished, and Cathcart managed to get them fed. He made sure that they had a square meal every day. which enabled many of them to stay alive. Uh, so to me, he's very much like Rick in that he's charming, great people skills. The idea of Cathcart's bar, it was called the Madhouse. It's strange it was called that before he took it over. Um, but it bears many similarities with Rick's Cafe Americain in Casablanca because you can imagine it's the same sort of sultry location, shadows of palm trees up against the whitewashed walls, spies, diplomats all circulating around in the bar, deals being done in the corner, and you've got the figure of Rick in Casablanca, you've got the figure of Cathcart in Algiers, circulating, making sure everybody has a drink, making sure that everybody's happy, that there's no fights breaking out, and just diffusing trouble with his personal charm. And meanwhile, making sure that things are being doing quite a moral thing in feeding his comrades and making sure they stay alive.
I was going to actually throw in also that when I was reading about him, I pictured more of Joseph, the son of Joshua, when he was a slave or captive in Egypt. But
I agree. It's very, very similar. In fact, the stories are so similar that at first I thought this is going to be one of these myths where people, take a biblical story and adapt it to a different setting. But no, it's absolutely well documented, and his rise to power at the palace is just it mirrors the story of Joseph. Absolutely.
Now, Alan, did you say Joseph, the son of Joshua?
yeah,
You mean the son of Jacob? I think
yes,
yes.
yes, yes,
There you
yes.
go. There you go. Look,
Yeah, let's. We might need to edit that. I
no,
don't
no,
know.
we're not editing it because this
What
is
do you
one of
mean?
the rare. This is one of the
All right,
rare
you know what?
opportunities that I get in my lifetime to correct anything that you
When
say.
you when you screw up, I'm gonna remember this, okay, and I'm gonna throw it back right at you. So yeah,
Well,
all right.
absolutely.
Enjoy this one. Enjoy this one. All right. So all right. Let's talk to our guest. That's why he's here. All right. So now the Barbary Pirates. So you had, let's see, Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli. I don't know. I don't know if Egypt was considered a Barbary pirate nation or Barbary nation, but I know most of them were vassals of the Ottoman Turks. I don't know about Morocco, but what was, and you can correct me on all that, but what was their relations with the European powers such as Spain, France, England, and as well as some of the lesser powers? Because I know they went to war with the Netherlands and Sweden, but I mean, what were their relations like throughout the decades or centuries?
Well, you're absolutely right with your description of the Barbary. The name Barbary derives from Berber, so it's really a reflection of the western part of North Africa. It's the states involved. There was four of them: Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, more or less mirroring Algeria, Tunisia, Libya today. Egypt wasn't so much involved. The Morocco was independent. It wasn't a Barbary state, but it was independent. It was a kingdom. But the other three were vassals of the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. But they were very much semi-detached, and their ethos was very much piratical. They had a pirate ethos, and this began back in the early 1500s when the Barbarossa brothers, freelance pirates, recaptured Algiers from the Spanish very unexpectedly and held on to it. And they offered it to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And for a while, the Algiers was ruled jointly by pirates and by the Turkish militia, but that changed as time went on. So at the time we're talking about, Algiers had settled down a bit. It had a very stable government at this time. When the Dey of Algiers, the ruler was Mahmoud. He had been there for quite some time, but so they settled down into a sort of tributary state where it was a bit like a protection racket, rather than actually stealing ships from European powers and then ransoming them back. They decided to just cut out the middleman and just get the powers to pay them directly tributes. So most of them signed up to this. Britain signed up, France signed up, later Spain signed up, and there was a lot of money involved. I mean, you would have you would have people paying fortunes just to have protection for their ships. But the real thing, but they had to keep the piratical practice because otherwise nobody would be afraid of them. So they had to be at war with somebody all the time. So they were at war with Sweden, they were at war with the Netherlands, they were at war with different people at different times. The other corsair states like Malta, for instance, Naples, that sort of thing. Um, so they would get paid for that. But every time there was a change of government, every time there's a change of ruler, all the bets were off again. And the new ruler would say, okay, that was then, this is now, what are you going to give me now? So the whole dealing process would start all over again. The strange thing about it was that if the European powers had banded together, they would have easily crushed this menace in no time at all. But this was a time uh, where they all wanted to get an edge on trade on neighbours. So they were quite happy if Algiers, for instance, started um, capturing somebody from France. Say, for instance, the British would be quite happy because that would give them a trading edge over France. So they were all at each other's throats, the European powers, in a bid to get leverage over the other one. And then America comes on the scene, newly independent America, um, in '83. And up until this time, they've had protection from France during the War of Independence due to their alliance with France. And before the war, of course, they were part of the British Empire, so they had protection from Britain. But now, after '83, they have no protection whatever. And America this was the very early days of the states. They didn't have a proper central government at this stage. This was it was the Confederacy Congress, where central government didn't have the power to tax all the colonies. Different colonies were taking different positions on different things, so it wasn't very easy to get a decision made about foreign policy. So the question of what to do about the Barbary Pirates was something that was very much debated. They put forward a trio of people, very remarkable people in America, to deal with the problem. There was Ben Franklin, there was John Adams, and there was Thomas Jefferson. And it's a sign of the sort of disunity on the subject of the Americans that each of them had a different approach to the idea of how to deal with the Barbary Pirates. Jefferson was very much and remained a hawk. He wanted to build up a navy very quickly and go and teach these people not to mess with America. But the trouble is, America didn't have a navy. In '85, the Continental Navy had been disbanded. In fact, coincidentally, just the same summer as Cathcart was captured, they got rid of the last ship of the old Continental Navy. So they were completely without a navy. Wouldn't have another one until '97 for a long time. So Jefferson wanted to do that, build up the navy. Franklin just decided it'd be best to avoid the Mediterranean altogether. That way, there's no problem. You don't sail into the Mediterranean. You don't have to pay tribute. Adams was more pragmatic. He said, "Yes, I agree with Jefferson that we need to build up a navy, but in the meantime, we don't have a navy. We're going to have to pay tribute." So that was his stance on it. So the three men didn't really get along on that basis. And first of all, they had a bit of trouble with Morocco. What American ship was captured, but that able to get that back and agree a treaty with Morocco. But Algiers was much harder not to crack because for two reasons. First of all, just because they were looking for another enemy. They always had to be fighting somebody at all times. And secondly, because the British were proactively trying to get the Algerians to attack America. First of all, because they had a grudge against the independent America for obvious reasons. And Secondly, because they didn't want the Americans coming and interfering with their trade in the Mediterranean, because the Americans have quite a lot of trade in the Mediterranean, especially wheat. And if there's anything that they could do to keep the Americans out, they wanted to do it. So they, in one of these sort of hard to believe things, the British consul actually went to the ruler of Algiers in '85 and said, listen, these people are coming here to the Mediterranean. They have to go through the Straits of Gibraltar. They're easy meat. You can just, they've got no navy to protect them. They're completely vulnerable. Take as many as you want. And it's quite extraordinary when you think that people, who shared the same sort of culture, values, language, America and Britain, that Britain would be um, so cold-hearted as to sort of encourage these captures. But they did, and in '85 you had the Maria with Cathcart on board, with 6 people on board captured. Then you had a second ship, the Dauphin, with 15 people on board. So by '85 you had 21 Americans captured and held hostage in Barbary, in Algiers.
Now, I keep reading stories that there was, or it was maybe alluded to, a meeting with Jefferson, Adams, and maybe it was the day of Algiers or one of his diplomats. Do you know anything? I mean, was there a meeting with the three of them, or was it just diplomatic?
I'm not entirely sure on this, so I wouldn't swear to it, but I have a feeling it was Tripoli, and it took place in London.
Yeah, it was the one where they said that they were saying, "Why are you attacking us? We haven't done anything to you," and the response was, "You're infidels. We are allowed to."
Yeah, I read about this. I haven't included that in the book, so I wouldn't be terribly sure about the. But I think more or less that sums up the conversation. So it was a clash of different ideologies. That was America's actual approach throughout. We're not causing any harm to anybody. Why wouldn't we let us come and trade freely? The Algerians were saying, "You just don't get it, do you? This is the way things work in the Mediterranean. This is the way things have always worked. We ask you for tribute, you pay us tribute. What's the problem?" And but the Americans didn't want to do this for one reason: they didn't have money. They were After the war, they were completely broke, and the only way they could get money was through trade. And if they were allowed to trade, they could make money. Therefore, they could build. This was Jefferson's point, actually. That he was saying, people keep telling me we don't have enough money to build up a navy, but we're not going to get money until we trade, and we can't trade unless we have protection for our ships. So that was his point of view. So you had these 21 Americans in Algiers. The government wanted to help them, but the American government really couldn't do anything about it. They could have actually ransomed them at quite a small amount of money, but their stance, and it's a stance we recognise today, is we don't want to give in to blackmail. If we start paying money, we're going to be paying money all the time. There's going to be more people captured. There's going to be more demands. So we're not going to start going down that road. So the stance that Jefferson adopted was one of feigned indifference. He he tried to back channel a message to the captives that the Americans were trying to do as much as they could, but they couldn't be seen to be doing this. So they would try to pretend that they were indifferent to the plight of the captives. But the trouble is, from a captive's point of view, there wasn't a great deal of difference between feigned indifference and genuine indifference. So they got quite bitter. The captives got quite bitter about being they perceived that they were being neglected by people at home. Jefferson, though, was far from inactive. He actually had um, he started to engage in negotiations with a monastic order called the Trinitarians. I'm not sure if I got that right, monastic or priests, whatever, something like that. They specialized in ransoming captives from Barbary. and they were based in Paris. And he went to see them secretly and said, "I've got a great idea. Why don't you rescue or ransom these people um, by yourselves, pretending it's sort of part of a charitable endeavour, and we'll back channel the money to you so that you can, that way, we won't be seen to be rewarding terrorism, but our people will get free." And it was actually quite a very good idea, but the government didn't really want to know, and they delayed and delayed. And by the time they gave the go ahead, the French Revolution had broken out, and the Trinitarians, like all other religious orders, were persecuted by the revolution, and that was the end of that. But it was a quite a clever idea.
So, what was it like? Speaking of the lions, what was it like in the prisons in Algiers? And also, who were the days? And I want to uh, also mention, because you said lions, like there were animals, mention the animals that would often escape into into the prisons. It was like as if you're not in a bad enough spot, all of a sudden you've got some lion or tiger that will escape.
Yeah, this is it seems funny because but it can't be too funny for the people involved. The ruler would keep two young lions at his palace. He didn't like to keep them until they got too big. But when they grew up and they got out of control, he would send them to one of the prisons where the prisoners were kept, the hostages were kept, and they didn't treat them well at all. They put them into cells at these prisons and chained them up to the walls. And occasionally somebody would come near them and throw a bullock head or something like that in for the animals to eat. They didn't get any out into the fresh air. They didn't get any proper food. Nobody really cared about them. And every so often, a couple of them would yank their chains free from the wall and go rampaging around the prison. Uh, and people were getting killed. And the trouble was that the rules in Algiers was that nothing belonging to the Dey, the ruler, could be interfered with without express permission from the Dey. So nobody was able to shoot these lions as they rampaged through the prison. They had to send a messenger to the palace, ask the Dey, "Is it okay to kill this lion?" "Yeah, sure." So somebody would go back and then shoot the lion. Meanwhile, there were several corpses lying around, but they were just prisoners, so nobody cared. It didn't matter about them.
That is bizarre.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was bizarre. So yes, it was. Uh, Cathcart's time at the palace didn't last very long, about a year. It was reasonably good compared to his later career. Although he was subjected to horrendous beatings. They had the punishment that they used in Algiers was the bastonado. That was the usual one, which was somebody would be hiked up feet upwards, and they would be hit on the soles of their feet and on the stomach, and sometimes on the buttocks with a rod, a timber rod. And this would be maybe 50, 100 strokes just for minor misdemeanors. And Cathcart got this several times, once just for reading, being caught reading a book. And as a result, he didn't know when his punishment was going to come, and he started to have some sort of mental breakdown, like he called it, by sentimental afflictions. But I imagine it was probably depression. But he suffered from this and had quite an episode before he recovered from it. But then a year on, he's taken out of the palace. We were talking about biblical analogies earlier. He was literally thrown out of the garden, expelled from the garden, and sent down to this horrific prison, which is called the Bagno Balik. It was called Bagno because they were former baths, public baths, and but they've been converted into prisons. And there was hundreds of prisoners being kept there in terrible conditions. They spent the night there, but they were woken at 3 o'clock every morning by a loud call from the guardian of the prison, shouting, "Sleepers awake!" And they had to assemble down in the prison yard, and were marshalled down to the docks and to the quarries for quite. Um, it, it is very hard, grueling work, shifting rocks from the quarries down to the dock, carrying timber. A lot of people were disabled for life because the work was so hard. Cathcart didn't fare too badly. He was apprenticed to a carpenter and ended up going around the different houses of Algiers working with this carpenter. Trouble was that even despite this, this was a reasonably cushy end of the job. Despite all this, every Friday, everybody had to go to to a public works, to a sort of construction scheme, and work shifting rocks, carrying rocks. They were putting huge boulders onto sleds, and they had to push them or pull them at the end of ropes. It was very sort of primitive technology, all the time being whipped by overseers. So it was not an easy job by any means. So Cathcart had to put up with this for quite some time. He uh, managed to get a shift upwards uh, by, well, it was really by bribery and corruption. He got to know the guards in the prison. The guards were statists. They were Spaniards. They were called corneros, and they had their own operation going. They would bribe the prisoners, or sorry, they would get the prisoners to bribe them in return for not having certain punishments. Um, Cathcart managed to get a little bit of money, and he slipped this to the Carneros to get a transfer to a slightly more civilized prison called the Bagnio Galleria, and it was there that most of the other Americans were, and it was a much sort of quieter place. It didn't have the criminal element. There was criminals in the first prison as well as prisoners of war. So he Cathcart was there at exactly the right time when there was a shortage of captives, and they needed people to fill the bureaucracy because there'd been a mass ransoming of other nations. As a result of this, Cathcart ends up um, in a place called the Marine Department of the Marine under the Marine Minister. His name was Hassan, who would later go on to become the ruler of Algiers himself. Hassan seems to have taken a shine to the young guy, Cathcart. He makes him his coffee maker, which sounds that it's not a great job, but in fact it was a very good job because everybody who came to visit Hassan, the diplomats, the visitors from other Islamic countries, tradition was they had to slip a few coins into the empty coffee cup after they'd drunk. So this went to the captives um, just because of tradition. So Cathcart began to make a bit of money this way. Then there was a plague hit our Algiers, and people started to die in the Marine Ministry until there was practically nobody left apart from Cathcart and Hassan. And meanwhile, he'd shadowed Hassan's clerk at the Marine, who was one of the Italians that I mentioned earlier that he'd met in Boston. Because of that, um, he was able to take over the Italian's job as a clerk at the Marine. And Hassan was able to see how he worked and his skills. Um, Cathcart, I forgot to mention, had language skills. He was great. He learned everywhere he went. He learned a new language. He spoke Portuguese, Spanish, um, what else? Oh, Arabic. He spoke Arabic as well. And he had great people skills. He was just very, what we call emotional intelligence. He was very good with people. So he got this sort of technique of being able to work with Hassan, he was an explosive personality. Hassan, he flew into tempers at the least provocation. And Cathcart was one of these people who was able to, you know, the way poker tellers or poker players can spot a tail, a sort of little twitch of the eye or something like that that can show when someone's bluffing or not bluffing. And Cathcart was able to tell when an explosion was on the way just through sort of the micro expressions on the Hassan's face. So he was able to work very successfully with Hassan, with the result that when Hassan finally in 1791 took over as ruler of Algiers, he brought Cathcart along with him, and a year later, Cathcart became clerk to the day. The position was actually called Chief Christian Clerk. Now, this was Clark, depends on how you pronounce it. Um, now, it was actually quite a powerful position because it involved liaising with all the diplomats from other nations and advising Hassan on on what approach to take. So he was actually quite a grade councillor.
So you had mentioned Jefferson's, I guess, diplomatic ploy, which was feigned indifference. You have everything just seems from bad to worse. I mean, you've got these guys that are taken over, thrown into prison. You got wild animals going nuts, killing people. Then you have the plague that hits every once in a while. You've got the beatings. You got people more or less starving. And then you've got, as you mentioned, like the British consul, Charles Logie. He was out of control. He was a real jerk, undermining the Americans, also the French consuls. But talk about Joseph Donaldson and Joel Barlow. When I'm reading it, these are the American diplomats. To me, they almost seemed indifferent to the plight of these American prisoners as well.
Yeah. Well, when Joseph Donaldson came, he was the second attempt that the Americans had tried to negotiate a treaty. They'd earlier sent a man called Lamb to try and negotiate a treaty, but he turned out to be way over his depth. He was completely, and they were talking completely financially different universes, so that didn't work out very well. When then in '93, before Donaldson arrived, we had this terrible ramping up of the situation when the Algerians suddenly, without warning, went out and captured another 11 American ships, with the result that you had something like 120 Americans in Algiers. And suddenly, the problem had increased exponentially. So you had all these American captives where before there'd only been 21. There was a new sense of urgency to the problem. So the Congress got together, passed the Navy Act, authorizing 6 frigates to be built. Now, this was specifically to counteract the Algerian menace. So the U.S. Navy was formed on this issue alone. And it's interesting to think that they had this clause in the agreement that the 6 frigates could be built, but if peace came to with Algiers, it would all be cancelled again. So there'd be no navy. As it turned out, it didn't happen like that, but this was the background to it. So we've got in 1795, Joel Barlow is appointed as the representative in Algiers. He's based in Paris. He's very much a literary figure. He's a very cultured individual. Didn't want to go to Algiers. He was quite happy in Paris, as you would be. He didn't want to be separated from his wife. He had to leave his wife behind. So while he was getting ready to come, he took his time to come to Algiers. Joseph Donaldson was sent there as a sort of Sherpa to spy out what was possible, what was not possible. Now it's at this stage, the ruler of Algiers was very anti-American. He had become so disillusioned that he said no, he didn't want to see Donaldson at all. It was only through Cathcart's good offices he agreed to see Donaldson at all. So Donaldson arrives in Algiers. He turns out to be quite a colourful figure. He suffered badly from gout and found it hard to walk. And he couldn't have come to a worse place than Algiers because it was built on the side of a hill. That was to walk anywhere in Algiers is quite an effort, even for someone who's fully able. And for a disabled man, it must have been terrible. So there's a great description by Cathcart about Donaldson arriving. He's dressed not for a hot climate, but for a cold climate. Before long, he's sweating. He can't walk properly. The kids in Algiers are running around him and pulling at him, and he starts shouting at these people. He finally gets to the American house where it's been let aside for him, and he goes in and he collapses on the sofa and he unleashes this stream of curse words uh, about Algiers, about everybody in Algiers. And there's a local man who didn't understand English, and he asked, "What's he saying?" And Cathcart or somebody else says, he's just so glad to be here that he's saying a prayer of thanksgiving. And the local man said, well, he must be very devout because the prayer was so passionate. In fact, of course, it was a blasted Christmas. But anyway, Donaldson turns out to be quite a cornuptious individual. He starts trying to negotiate a peace treaty, but he's not very imaginative. He's not very forthcoming. It's left up to Cathcart as the chief clerk to try and come between uh, the days. The day was asking crazy money. He was wanting 2.5 million from from America, uh, and Donaldson was willing to offer only a few hundred thousand. So they're not in any in the same ballpark at all. Cathcart doesn't give up. Donaldson keeps despairing. He keeps saying, "No, I'm going to give up. I'm going to go home." Cathcart keeps on admitting, "No, no, keep trying." Cathcart keeps going back and forward through the day. The day gets angry with Cathcart and threatens to decapitate him, which he was quite capable of doing. And he says, at the very least, you're going to get 500 bastinados if you keep this up. He keeps going back. Cathcart doesn't give up. And finally, between the two of them, they work out a deal which involves $650,000, which in shipped spares and in hard cash. So, quite unexpectedly, and thanks to Cathcart, the deal is done. The United States flag is saluted with a gun salute in the bay. Cathcart realizes that everybody's trying to sabotage this deal, so he reworks an existing treaty to try and get the treaty finished in time. So it's done and dusted. They're ready to go. Joel Barlow, meanwhile, is on his way. And as this is happening, the day is waiting for this money to be delivered. Uh, the Americans have got $800,000 in credit in the banks in Europe, but unfortunately, they can't get the hard cash because Europe is being written apart by the repercussions of the French Revolution. Napoleon Bonaparte, is about to go to war, and all of Europe is engulfed. They go to all the different banks to try and get hard cash. The Bay wants hard cash, nothing else, and they can't get it anywhere. They go back and forward, London, Portugal, wherever, Netherlands. There's no hard cash to be found. So the deal goes into abeyance. Uh, the ruler gets more and more angry. He keeps saying, "Right, we're going to we're going to go on the attack again. We're going to get hundreds more American seamen." Cathcart's very worried about this because he hears on the grapevine that back in America, word has got through about this treaty being finalized, and everybody thinks everything's fine and dandy, that everything's peaceful, that the Americans can sail into the Mediterranean quite safely. So they're starting to send ships across into a trap, and nobody knows about this in America. Everybody thinks that peace has been declared, and Cathcart knows that no, this isn't happening. The Americans are sailing right into the jaws of captivity, and if he doesn't do something, these, there can be hundreds more captured. So they work out a scheme between the Day and Cathcart where uh, Cathcart, Joel Barlow is here by this stage. He's arrived in Algiers. Again, he's trying to do things, but they're not working out. He's trying to use sort of old school diplomacy, and it's not working with the ruler. Um, so they work out a scheme whereby Cathcart, while still a hostage, can sail across to America to have a private meeting, to take a meeting, to a letter to George Washington. The Day trusts George Washington as a man who'll keep his word. So he writes a letter to George Washington to say, "Listen, this is what's happening. Uh, we're uh, we're about to capture more Americans because you've reneged on your deal to give me these ships and this money. So I'm sending you this letter as a personal plea to start delivering it, making good on your word." So Cathcart agrees to this. He has his own ship. He fits it out himself at his own expense, and he sails off in May 96 to sail across to America and deliver this message. This is a sort of dash to try and uh, to try and stop him from being captured. So he heads off. Meanwhile, the money comes through, and it comes through in quite a strange way, in which the French consul comes to Algiers. He wants to he wants to borrow hard cash from the Algerian currency treasury. The day hands over the hard cash to the French consul. The French consul doesn't want to walk around Algiers with this hard cash. He gives it to the banker to lodge. Along comes Barlow, asks the banker for the same money to borrow it on the strength of the credit that the Americans built up. The banker hands it over. Barlow hands it over to the ruler, and it's exactly the same money goes back into the Algiers treasury again. So, along with some other money, they're able to get enough to free the captives. So, the captives are freed in July 96. They go across to Marseille in France, and quite a few of them have died at this stage. And meanwhile, Cathcart has arrived in Philadelphia. He dines with George Washington that very night. George Washington is appalled to hear that things have got to such a state, and he orders work to begin immediately on the ships and the spares that are needed to get this treaty through. So Cathcart's great achievement, apart from saving the lives of so many people through his bars, through his food banks at the bars, has been to buy the United States 9 months of extra time and stop the Corsairs capturing more Americans. Now you can imagine an alternative universe in which he didn't do that. And if that it hadn't happened, the Americans would have sent hundreds more seamen through the Straits of Gibraltar. They'd have probably been captured by the Algerian Corsairs. There would have been hundreds, if not over 1,000 Americans in Algiers. That would have dealt a great body blow to the American morale. And what happened later would not have panned out the same way. As it was, Cathcart managed to get the peace treaties salvaged. He managed to get the captives out and home because he bought time for that. And as a result, America was able to bought time to build up its navy. First ships began arriving in '97, and they were ready for action when the First Barbary War erupted in 1801. So they won. Uh, they won that particular confrontation. It was Tripoli, and that was a great boost to the morale of the new nation. Um, I'm sure you're aware of the phrase "the shores of Tripoli" in the Marines hymn. Uh, uh, the shores of Tripoli. This was a reference to the First Barbary War. So, being able to have that victory over the Barbary states led the framework for the Second Barbary War, and as a result, Americans did not were no longer living in fear of the Barbary Pirates. That was an end of an era as far as they were concerned.
Now, did Cathcart have an influence in any way that when we went to war with Tripoli in 1801, Jefferson's first year in office, um, did Cathcart have an influence that prevented us from going to war with Algiers? And if that was the case, what happened in 1815 when we did go to war with Algiers?
What happened was that Cathcart had actually been appointed as consul in Tripoli, so he was there for the sort of ringside seat for the start of the First Barbary War. It was declared in what happened was that America was trying to make a deal. The ruler of Tripoli didn't want to do this. Um, wanted more money than America was prepared to pay. As a result, he declared war in very dramatic fashion by cutting down the American flagstaff at the American consulate. Cathcart was told by the ruler of Tripoli, um, we're expelling all Americans, but you can stay if you like. And Cathcart said, no, not at all, I'm out of here. So he went out there, and he was instrumental in organising the conduct of the war. First of all, by trying to negotiate or trying to institute a regime change in Tripoli. Probably the first time that it happened in American politics, but not the last. They wanted to try to unseat the ruler and get someone else who was more favorably disposed towards America. But anyway, the war, I think it was General Ekin, this is outside the scope of my book, marched across Algiers, took a city, and was about to carry on to the capital, went across Tripoli. And then a truce was negotiated, and peace was arrived at. So that was the end of the First Barbary War. The Second Barbary War happened in Algiers and happened under a new day, and they've just gone back to their old techniques of ripping up the peace agreements that had been made before. As far as I know, Cathcart had no part in that because he had moved on, first of all to Tripoli and then to consulate somewhere else. So it was very much, it didn't last very long. The Second Barbary War, I think, just a few days, wasn't it? I can't remember. It's outside the scope of my book, but again, it resulted in a resounding victory for America, and it meant the end of the Barbary Wars for America.
Well, Des, it's a fascinating story. Like this guy just plays such a significant role, and he gets no play. He really gets no play, and when it comes to just history being retold here in the States. And like I said earlier, it's great that you've put this book together, that you're telling his story, and the book again is The Lionkeeper of Algiers. Thank you again for writing the book, joining us, and we hope you had a good time discussing James Cathcart.
I had a ball. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, and stay out of those hot air balloons.
I'm never going to go in one again in my life.
Well, we had a good time talking to you. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Well, I got to say, if there's anybody that I have had a conversation with regarding the Barbary Pirates or the First or Second Barbary Wars, it's this gentleman. He seemed to he seemed to know that subject very well, and it's a good thing that he's doing what he's doing because, as we mentioned in the introduction, the First and Second Barbary Wars, people just don't know about it, and thank God that we have a man like him, writing about it, and a very good story, very enlightening story, to get that story out.
Yeah, and what's pretty cool is that he's Irish. He's over in Ireland, and he is covering a story that has substantial effect on what happened here in America. So it's pretty cool that he's putting that together, and obviously there is the Irish connection because, like he was saying, James Cathcart is or was Irish American.
Yeah, and he's got like the American version of Joseph, the son of Jacob.
Yeah.
I was gonna say the son of Israel because I know Jacob changed his name to Israel or something like that. So what probably would have been easy, but Joshua, I got him kind of confused. I think he was on that Charlton Heston movie. So that the guy who played Joshua was married to Bo Derek in the Ten Commandments.
Is he still alive?
No, he died. I don't know when, but I think his name was John Derek. He played Joshua in the Ten Commandments movie, the Charlton Heston one. But yeah, he was married to Bo Derek. That's how she got her last name.
Interesting. Is she still alive?
She is still alive. Although I haven't seen her in a movie since Tommy Boy, so I don't know how she looks now.
You know, I don't like to put women on a scale of any kind, but if there was ever a 10, I think Bo Derek is a 10.
Oh, there were quite a few of them. You know, my favorite.
All right, you know what? Forget it. Because if you're not gonna go with that joke,
I get it. I get
then
the
we
10.
need to move on. No, forget it. I'm done with this conversation, ladies and gentlemen. Did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, you're acting like a little woke college student. You're acting like Veruca Salt right now. You want things your way, Daddy.
Well, that is true. That is true. And yeah, I'm a terrible person for wanting that. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings our show to an end. In honor of our good friends over in Ireland, go out and get you a nice drink from Dublin. And no, this is not a soda. So, anyways,
Or
Alan,
you can finish up your martini. I got, Gotta have the olive. You can't have a martini without an olive. Otherwise, you have a Gibson.
Yeah. Okay. Are you done? Because I feel like I got nothing else to say to you.
I think this presentation spoke volumes. It was a good conversation. And I've always been fascinated with the Barbary Pirates wars, the wars of the Barbary Pirates. And, good to have someone with the knowledge to give us that information, which, by the way, did lead to colonialism in North Africa, I might add. And it did end a lot of the Barbary pirate activity and slavery that went on. Slavery on white Europeans.
All right, man. Well, it was good to see you. I hope you have a great week, whatever it is that you're going to be doing.
I'll fill you in as things go along. So, but yeah, I appreciate that, and good job on finding this gentleman. A good author.
Hey, man, he found me. Actually, his publicist or the publisher did. So.
Oh, okay. Well, good. So I can imagine we'll be getting more good authors here.
We got plenty.
All right.
We got plenty. So, all right, buddy. Well, I love you. Say hello to your mother for me. I will talk to you later.
I will. Love you too, man. Say hello to your parents. So.